blue and said, would I be interested in writing a James Bond book for younger readers about James Bond's early life? And I'm a massive James Bond fan. I grew up through the 1960s where the James Bond films were the biggest thing in the world. I've got 3 boys who are the right age to read the James Bond books. And they're like anyone else, like any boy watching James Bond films when I was a kid, all I wanted to do when I grew up was James Bond. I thought, well, maybe one day they'll cast me as the new James Bond. I've had to realise now it's too late. I've got too old. It's never going to happen. But I've got the next best thing, which is actually writing about James Bond, the real James Bond. So this was like a dream job for me, to be able to sit down at my computer and actually write the lines in a book, the name's Bond, James Bond. Was really, really exciting. This wasn't someone who was a bit like James Bond, like Alex Rider. He wasn't James Bond's nephew. He was the real James Bond. And I was writing a real James Bond book. And that, you know, I was like a big kid. That was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to me. But I was faced with a problem because I'd never written anything for kids before. I'd written books for adults, I'd written for TV. I hadn't written for people of your age. And I thought, well, how do I go about that? How do I know that what I'm writing kids will like? That I don't want to bore them, I don't want to make the books too complicated, but again, I don't want to make them sort of too babyish. So I thought, you know, how do I go about it? So all I had to go on was my own kids. So as I was writing the first book in the series, Silverfin, as I would finish a chapter, I would read it to my kids at night as a bedtime story, which is why the books are so violent. Often, you know, when I first started writing them, occasionally I'd do events like this, and teachers or librarians would say, well, I really like the James Bond books, and it's great that you've got boys reading in particular, but they are quite violent, aren't they? And I say, it's not my fault. Blame my kids. Because my boys, like all boys, are incredibly bloodthirsty. So I'd be reading away quite happy, and I'd introduce a new character, and they'd go, kill him! And I was sitting there saying, what do you mean kill him? I can't kill him. He's got to go here and do that and go and talk to these people. I said, no, that would be boring. Just kill him. I don't like him. Kill him. Push him off a cliff. You're the writer. You can do what you like. Oh, no, I'll tell you what, even better than that. He falls in the road and a lorry goes over his head and it pops like a watermelon. If my boys had had their way, the James Bond books would have just been one killing after another, each one more nasty and disgusting than the last. But I've had to explain to them, I said, actually that would be quite boring. You know, you've got to put in plot and character development, you've got to get inside people's minds and dialogue and all that stuff. Otherwise, if you just do, because it happens a lot, I occasionally read kids' short stories from school, and Lofton boys will write that type of story, which is just, oh, the man walked into a room and another man hit him with an axe, and then someone else came through the window with a machine gun and shot them all, and then the whole place exploded, and a helicopter came in and bombed everything. And it gets really boring after about one page. It's quite funny for a bit, but then you just think, we need some story here. We need some development. But I was really pleased that actually my boys did seem to like the books. They got into it, and they were great. They would give me lots of suggestions of things that might happen. Say, oh, Dad, what if James Bond did that? And you think, yeah, that's all right. And they go, I'd read a bit more, Dad, what if? He says, shut up now, all right? I'm writing this book. But no, they were very useful, and I was really pleased that when the books came out, I found that other kids had the same tastes as my boys, and that they seemed to like the books too, and they've gone on to sell really well, which is really pleasing. I knew the first one would sell because it's James Bond, and everyone knows James Bond. I thought, oh, a James Bond book. But I understood that if that book wasn't any good, if the kids didn't enjoy reading it, they wouldn't read any others. So I was really pleased at how well that went, and I really enjoyed doing that. When Silverfin came out, the first book in the series, I was given an offer by one of the newspapers to write an article for them. They said they'd give me a free holiday in Scotland if I'd write about it. They wanted to send me up to Scotland with my family, where we would go to some of the locations from the book. Silverfin is largely set in Scotland. And they would send me to some nice hotels, and we could travel around visiting some of the places in the book, which was fantastic. This is some of the nice things that happen when you're a writer. You get asked to do things like this. So we went up there, we got on the sleeper train from King's Cross in London. We travel overnight in a bed, which is what James Bond does in the book, if any of you read it. And we went up to the west coast of Scotland, which is a very beautiful area. One of the key locations in the book is this castle on an island, which is where the villain has his hangout. And the newspaper had found us a hotel to stay in, which was on an island, a bit like the castle in the book. So this was really exciting. And we went there, and it was a very, very beautiful location. It was set in the middle of this loch, which is simply what Scottish people call a lake. And we got there, and it was a beautiful sunny day, and I said to the kids, oh, come on, let's go for a walk around the island. And they said, oh, yes, Papa, yes, please, let's go for a walk. Actually, they didn't. They said, oh, Dad, can't we just sit in our room and watch TV? But I forced them out, me and my wife, and we forced them to go on this walk. And there we are going, oh, look, kids, isn't it beautiful the way the mountains are reflected in the water? They weren't interested. They were off playing a game. Because this island was fantastic. It was covered with rocks and trees and woodland, and there were ruined buildings on it, and little jetties going out to the water. It was a fantastic place for them to explore and play their game. So as we walked around for about 2 hours, they started playing this game. And it was one of those very complicated games that kids often get into, mainly involving fighting. So it was like, okay, the boat lands there, and we all come running up this way, and you're hiding behind the rocks there. You shoot us all down with a machine gun, and I'll die here. They particularly like the bits in the game where they died. They go, wah, and throw themselves on the ground, and then they say, right, and then you run up there, and we throw some hand grenades in, and then they go running off, and one of them go in a tree and say, right, I'm going to be a sniper, but you have to come in. And this game went on, and it became developed for about 2 hours. And I was there, and as their dad, I was thinking, right, I ought to be cross. I'm a dad, that's what dads do. I should be telling them to stop doing things. But then I thought, I can't really be cross, because I write James Bond books, which is just violent things happening and people shooting each other. So, but also, what really struck me, watching them play like that, was that they were doing exactly what I do as a writer. My job, really, is playing games like that. Because they were making up a story, and they were acting it out. And they were responding to the scenery that they were in, the place that they were in, and they were playing their story on top of it, almost like the island had become a huge film set, or a stage set. And if at the end of it they'd gone back and written it down, they would have had a little book. I mean, of course they didn't go and write it down, they went to watch TV. But me as a writer, what I do in my life is I play games like that, but I write them down.